I'm Jaime Levine, the Executive Director of Elder Law Advocacy, and today I'm talking to Caleb Logan. He's one of our attorneys at Elder Law Advocacy. He's been an attorney here for 4 years. Caleb, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I'm glad to talk about it. My background is a little bit different than most, I assume. I actually went into engineering in college, and so I made a switch when I changed to focus on law, and that was a pretty intentional shift, I would say. So, coming from a different background, I wanted to focus on more public interest type work that something like engineering wouldn't allow me to do as much. And that's actually what brought me to where I am today.
Nice. What attracted you to Elder Law Advocacy?
I think Elder Law Advocacy has a strong presence in San Diego, and since I'm from San Diego and wanted to serve the San Diego community after graduating and becoming a lawyer, it stuck out in that regard. So San Diego is a pretty small community, I would say. We have like Legal Aid of San Diego and the San Diego Volunteer Lawyer Program, and then Elder Law is really the third one that you know
Mm-hmm.
keeps older adults in check. And so that's one of the reasons that I found it. And I was looking for internships before my first year finished and came upon Elder Law, sent in my application. And then I remember you calling me I was in my bedroom. It was later at night since I was in North Carolina. So forward 3 hours. And that's what brought me to where I am now.
And then we stayed in touch.
Mhm.
You spent a little time at Legal Aid, and then you came back. We figured out how to bring you in as one of our lawyers.
Mhm.
And you do legislative and policy work, and you also handle elder abuse litigation.
Mhm.
Can you tell us about the policy and legislative work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So Elder Law is part of the California Low Income Consumer Coalition, of course, and short shortened version of that is CLIC. So with CLIC, we have a lot of legislative advocacy opportunities, and that's kind of when I was an intern, I loved being part of those calls, and now as an attorney, it's been a great part of my role here. So in 2022, we were coming up against a California Court of Appeals case that kind of limited the law of elder financial abuse. And with that, it seemed right for a legislative fix. So that was what started me into the bill writing aspect with CLIC, proposing a bill that would focus on that. That ultimately became SB 278, which we CLIC was able to actually co-sponsor with the Consumer Attorneys of California, since they had a similar idea. And unfortunately, that ultimately got vetoed by the governor. That was in 2024. So it was a 2-year effort that led to almost it getting passed. And so we returned this year with AB 909. And there were some conflicting bills in the legislature at that point. There's another one, AB 83. And so we're taking a step back at this point, again, focusing on a 2-year effort like SB 278, and we'll be returning in the fall, hopefully with a collaborative approach, working with the different industries involved and getting a solution that maybe not everyone will be happy with, but at least we can live with.
Right. Um, so you mentioned a case in 2022 that changed how the elder abuse litigation was being assessed. What was that case, and what's the issue with that case?
Right, so the case itself actually came down in 2010, I want to say. Uh, and it was just in 2022 when I really encountered the issues it
Ah,
was causing. And so that case is Doss versus Bank of America. And what it did, it was interpreting an old version of the elder abuse statute. That elder abuse law was updated in 2008 to change the standard for elder financial abuse. And that standard, as it is today, basically just says that if someone takes an older adult's property and they do so wrongfully, then they have committed elder financial abuse. But in order for that taking to be considered wrongful, the legislature codified this standard that says that it's wrongful when the person knew or should have known that their conduct was likely to harm the older adult in question. And so this older version before the 2008 amendment required bad faith, which is a higher standard, because if you think people are probably aware of negligence or at least have some concept of that idea, doing something negligently, and that's more of that knew or should have known standard. Bad faith is more of an intentional standard in some respects. And so this case, Doss was looking at a victim and said that in order for the defendant, Bank of America, to be liable for elder financial abuse, they needed to have actual knowledge of the underlying circumstances. So for us, it's generally in the context of a scam. The bank would need to have actual knowledge of the underlying circumstances of the scam to face liability. And since then, we've seen the federal courts in California especially focus more on that actual knowledge standard. There are some California trial courts that have gone the other way. So there's a little bit of tension there, and the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court haven't addressed the issue. So it kind of remains to be seen how that will play out without legislation changing the layout in some way.
Are there other jurisdictions that have a different standard or something that is just more protective of victims?
Not quite. So I actually did go through all 50 states' elder abuse statutes, and I should say most other states call elder financial abuse elder financial exploitation. So California is a bit of an outlier. The Virgin Islands, if this is kind of a fun fact, they actually adopted a version basically just copying the California law. So that's kind of fun. But generally, the elder financial exploitation is a lot of them are more criminal statutes rather than civil. So that makes it more limited because a person can't enforce criminal laws themselves. They need the government to bring a case and prosecute someone. And realistically, the criminal cases are also limited because we don't often know who the perpetrators of financial exploitation are, which means that there are other actors who share in the fault of not recognizing elder financial abuse when it happens, despite all of the information that means that they really should have known and seem to be willfully ignorant of, that no state has really approached. And in terms of so SB 278 and AB 909, those were focused on financial institutions just because they're an easy player to look at and say, well, you have your customer's transaction history, you know exactly what purchases they've made, what transaction types they've made, and all of that. And yet all of these red flags when a scam happens, for example, they do nothing. And so other states have enacted laws that give financial institutions an option to hold transactions for a certain period of time. There's a similar rule that already exists on the securities side of things. So we could kind of segment a bank into the depository side and then the securities side. So for investors, it's looked kind of like FINRA, the regulating agency there, has allowed this ability to hold transactions there. Of course, those are the wealthier people who generally have more money to lose, and those rules haven't been applied to the depository side. So then these other states have been bringing that option to hold rule. The issue is, and I've gone through the FTC data since 2020, I want to say they've been publishing it. And FTC, that's the Federal Trade Commission, that tracks reports of scams. And I haven't seen any significant difference between the states that have that option to hold rule and the number of scams they're their citizens are facing. So to me, it doesn't seem to have much of an impact, and it since it's optional, it's up to anyone's discretion, and who's to say whether they'll use it at all.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned Australia as potentially something that we could look to in terms of how they handle these things. What's the structure in Australia?
Definitely. So they, in February, passed the Australia Scam Prevention Framework Act, and that focuses on multiple corporate actors, not just financial institutions. So it includes the insurance industries, like social media platforms, and including the financial institutions as well. And basically, what it does is set out a comprehensive framework for them to disrupt scams, respond to scams, report scams. They also need governance policies that are designed to help address the issue of scams that are being perpetrated using their technology. And then there are administrative remedies. So the government, if they think that a business is doing something against the act, then they can get involved, and there are actually financial penalties up to 50 million Australian dollars, which the last time I looked, that's about 33 million US dollars. And then there are also possibilities for a private plaintiff to sue under the act if the act hasn't been followed. And really what the act requires is just that these industry players are taking reasonable steps to prevent scams, disrupt them when they're happening, and things like that. So it's pretty reasonable, no pun intended, ask of them to take these reasonable steps. So it kind of remains to see how it will play out in the end. Australia is also unique because before this legislation even passed, the Australian banks made a scam safe accord, as they call it, that actually targeted the issue of scams, and they kind of tried to identify best practices in responding to them. So it's a bit of a different landscape than the US. I think here we've seen the financial institutions primarily fight against any type of regulation and not proactively address it. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Since I want to ask you about AB 561, but since we've already kind of touched on scams, I'd like to hear about the kinds of scams that you're seeing and if you've had any related litigation that you've been involved in.
Right. So with my focus on elder financial abuse, the scams have taken a few forms, I would say, recently. Primarily, regardless of what type of scam it is, there's usually some involvement of cryptocurrency, whether it's buying cryptocurrency at an ATM and transferring it that way, or just there are these fake websites now that scammers use so that it looks like you're buying cryptocurrency, but you're actually not. You're just giving money straight to the scammer. And so that's another aspect that, for example, Coinbase has their own browser that you can access these websites on, and then it's going straight from your Coinbase account to the scammer. So just in terms of these institutional actors who could be doing something, that's an example of another area besides just financial institutions. And so I've been focused on the financial institution side with litigation, but looking for other areas to expand the law's reach. And also, since we are a nonprofit, we try to take the cases that the private attorneys aren't generally taking, and the cases against financial institutions are a good example of that, just because there aren't really private attorneys in California taking those cases. So that's what I've focused on there, as well as on representing. We also have, for example, participated in interpleader case in federal court. Interpleader just means that there's a dispute about some pot of money, and so the person with the money says, here you go, court, you can decide where that goes. And so here, with those types of cases, this would be when the FBI is actually able to recover funds, and then multiple people make claims to those funds, and then it ends up in court. So we've had some involvement there too.
How often does the FBI or law enforcement actually successfully prosecute or recover compensation for victims?
It is fairly rare, to be honest, and the issue is that the San Diego FBI is pretty unique in their involvement with this issue. They actually are part of the Elder Justice Task Force in San Diego, which is operated in conjunction with the San Diego District Attorney's Office. So it's a unique group in the nation, and with this task force and the FBI office, they are able to basically trace the cryptocurrency transactions. Since it is all public on the blockchain, they are traceable, and if you have the expertise, then you are able to do that. The issue is that because the scammers know that these transactions can be traced, they'll disappear the money as quickly as they can. So the FBI is really just combing through the Internet Crime Complaint Center reports, IC3, and if there's a recent enough transaction, then that's when they can get involved and hopefully recover some money. It's been, I don't even think it's been in the hundreds of thousands yet that they've recovered. Or I should say, I would have to pause on that. Because they can recover hundreds of thousands, but it's only been in a limited number of cases, I should say.
And cryptocurrency's attractive to criminals because there's privacy associated with it, or is it all really traceable? Like where does it stand? Originally, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were regarded as something completely impenetrable. What's happening now with those investigations?
Right. Well, the transactions themselves are impenetrable. That's not the issue. The issue is that with banks, for example, they have the Bank Secrecy Act. That's the federal law. And so they have to be filing currency transaction reports for some transactions over $10,000. For some transactions that look suspicious, that are over $5,000, they have to be filing suspicious activity reports. And so we've seen on the bank side, even those reporting mechanisms aren't really having an impact on the scrutiny of transactions. But with the cryptocurrency side, there's none of that. There's such little regulation, and there is a certain anonymity to it, in the sense that, yes, people have their public wallet addresses, but that doesn't really identify a person, and so it doesn't necessarily get you anywhere.
How I know a lot of the clients we see who are victims of scams that involve cryptocurrency, most of them have never been involved with cryptocurrency. So how are the scammers convincing them to suddenly put a bunch of money into crypto?
Right. No, it's a good question, because I think that some people have the reaction that, well, shouldn't this raise a red flag for the person being scammed? Like, why would they agree to do this? And it's really critical, I think, to understand the pressure that the scammers are putting on their victims so that they can't think clearly. And oftentimes the scammer will be saying that the bank or whatever financial institution the person is using is in on the scam. So that gets them to transfer assets away from the bank, and that could be primarily through cryptocurrency, but then also gold bars have been coming up recently, playing into that idea of you need to get your money out of the bank because they're in on it. And usually, I don't know why it's come up so often, but usually it'll be something like your money has been used as part of a child pornography ring, and so you're going to face the risk of criminal indictment if you don't listen to us, and then getting them to do transactions that allegedly will fix the issue, but is really just designed to give money to the scammer.
So the scammers try to make the situation emergent, and also try to figure out how the victims are susceptible to being pressured in some way. And so that's an example where you say, okay, your money's been used in something nefarious and you're potentially going to face liability. You have to take care of it right away.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they apply as much pressure as they can, and they also try and build up a relationship of trust with the person. So I know, like one of my clients, for example, the person she was talking with kept complimenting her about how good she is with the technology she was using and how impressive it was that she was able to do that. And they'll call them, they'll even call them like grandma or something like that,
Mm.
just to try and build up that trust. And in addition to the pressure where they're already not thinking clearly, they're making it seem like they are someone that can be trusted in this stressful time for the victim.
I want to ask you, I guess it's a bit speculative, but it seems like AI is transforming everything, and the deep fakes that are being used now for scams are just going to become indiscernible from reality in the future. So, what are we facing in terms of scams next year when AI is basically available to everyone for
Mhm.
almost no money? Like, where's this going, and how do we protect ourselves?
Right, it's hard to tell, and I think that the AI companies probably have some role to play in this in terms of fighting against frauds and scams. But you're right, I think that in the future we'll be having more. People can already spoof phone numbers, so just spoofing the voice now with AI is going to be all that more easier. And with the progression of AI, it's just going to become more realistic. And that could actually be a concern, especially for the older generation, since the Gen Z and people who have been around this technology for their whole lives, they're actually pretty adept at spotting AI created content. But someone who is less familiar with that has no idea, and it looks entirely real to them. So there are stories of parents even believing something is real and showing it to their child, and their child being like, "No, that's not real. That was created by AI." But the possibilities are really endless. I could think of, using AI to make a fake website that looks very convincing. It There are just so many possibilities. It's a little bit overwhelming to comprehend, but I think just leaves that impression that the AI companies need to be putting up some guardrails, or at least some understanding that the tools they are putting out can be used for improper means.
Yeah. I want to go back to the legislation that you're working on. I know you worked on AB 561. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right, and so as we record on September 26th, that is awaiting the governor's signature. So hopefully we'll have good news on that end. And what that bill was designed to address is that a couple years ago, domestic violence restraining orders were updated so that they could be electronically filed, and that makes it easier for victims to not have to go to court and deal with that, especially when electronic filing is mandatory for attorneys. It makes little sense to keep these classes of cases that can't be electronically filed. And so what AB 561 does is apply the same rules to elder abuse restraining orders, and then it also broadens it to there's a class of civil harassment restraining orders that are available to be freely filed if they're alleging particularly bad acts of stalking or violence. And in those situations, now those restraining orders would be able to be filed online. Civil harassment restraining orders, for context, are just kind of the garden variety restraining order that anyone would be filing normally. Elder abuse restraining orders are a little bit special because they're reserved for people 65 and up. Um, and so that especially is critical there because some of our clients looking for restraining orders have health issues. They can't easily go to court. And it's actually a bit of a transportation issue as well, just because they might not have a car. They might not have any money to spend, even if San Diego had great public transportation, some money to spend on a bus ride, and then sitting there all day without regard to any medical complications or whatever needs they have. You know, I think it grows exponentially difficult as we age to deal with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, if this gets signed, then it will smooth the process out and make the courts more accessible.
That's great. Last question. What makes seniors particularly susceptible to the kinds of scams that you see? I mean, we're all potentially targets, but why are the elderly particularly vulnerable?
Well, one aspect to consider is the data actually does show that younger people are more likely to fall victim to scams, but they lose less money. And so the vulnerability of older adults, it really comes in with unfamiliarity of technology that the younger generations don't have, and then also they have the resources that the scammers want. In addition to having the resources, they lack the resources to regain money that was lost. So if they transfer their retirement savings, they're likely not able to return to work and regain what was lost. And then they're stuck with the minimal income that Social Security has. Some people are lucky if they own a home because that generally isn't targeted by scammers. I would say homes are typically targeted by known scammers, like family members might try and take advantage of that, but not
Or predatory lenders?
Right, exactly. Can't forget them.
We know them.
Yes, definitely. But with these online scams, they're all being run by basically criminal syndicates, and whether it's China, India, across the world, that are just targeting the assets in banks, retirement accounts, all of that.
I want to thank you very much for chatting today and for the work you're doing, because both on the policy side and the litigation you're doing, it's really amazing for our clients and for the state and beyond.
Yeah, well, thank you for having this opportunity to talk about it all.